All right, my good people, welcome back to the show. I am Brandon Sylvia. This is Unnecessary Rambling, episode 13. I appreciate y'all for stopping by. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. We got a good one for you today. A lot of very much a games focused show today with 3 games that I am excited to talk with you all about. And the final topic here is, I'm recording this on Sunday, so we're going to go ahead and lock it in. It's still one that I am not super confident in that it will end up winning, because I think it's maybe 1 or 2 votes apart. With right now my GTA 6 wish list is at 26% of the vote, 30% of the vote is at 5 Things I Hate About Modern Gaming, and 35% of the vote is Why I Still Love Open World Games. So it's a really damn close poll this week for the final topic, but we're going to go ahead and lock in Why I Still Love Open World Games if that happens to change, and if 5 Things I Hate About Modern Gaming ends up victorious by, this time next week, then I will talk about that and then record a discussion about that at the end of next week's show. So I'm going to go ahead and run with what is in the lead currently. When I'm putting together these lists, it's like a part of me is like, well, should I save the real good shit and only put like 1 or 2 topics that can actually compete with each other for what I think people would want to hear me discuss? But I don't know, I feel like that's kind of, boring. Throw out a bunch of good topics and let you guys figure out what you're most interested in. So I had a lot of thoughts about all of these different topics that could have won, but Why I Still Love Open World Games, I think that's going to be an interesting one to dive into. So we will kick that off. I do got to say, though, I didn't have a ton of time to prepare because I was sitting there watching the vote, and it was like swaying. Like at one point my GTA 6 wish list was winning, and then at another point it was 5 Things I Hate About Modern Gaming winning, and then at the end Why I Still Love Open World Games kind of came back from either second or third place and ended up taking over and coming out victorious. So I don't have a ton of thoughts prepared on Why I Still Love Open World Games, but I think that's one I could probably ramble on about and give you a good breakdown of why that still is probably my favorite genre, even if I think it's not. So we'll just save that for the final discussion, though. But yeah, man, some good shit. Top 10 games of 2001. Some good shit today. Also, before we get into the show, let me pull up on June 8th, that is Summer Games Fest, the big showcase, and I will be watching that as soon as I get off work. I'll watch that and record a review of it. At the very latest, it'll go up on the 9th that morning, but I'll try to get it up on late on the 8th, late 7, 8 p.m. Central Time on the 8th. And then on the 11th, we have the Xbox Showcase, and that's on a Sunday. So I should be off work on that Sunday, and I should be able to watch that live and record a review right afterwards. Get that up, get that posted, and those will be 2 pieces of individual content on the channel for you. And then nothing's going to change. Yeah, nothing should change with the schedule for Unnecessary Rambling right now. There might be some changes coming in the future because there's a few things I'm working on, but when that time comes, I'll let you know more details about all of that. So that is kind of the game plan for right now on the late on the 8th or early on the 9th, Summer Games Fest Showcase review, and then on the 11th, my Xbox Showcase review. So very excited, packed, fucking lots of shit to talk about, and yeah, it's just always a blast going through. And even with showcases that weren't all that incredible, like the PlayStation Showcase, it's still fun to just recap, look through a bunch of games, and kind of look ahead at the future of what we're going to get in this industry. So I am pumped, but let's not keep you waiting any longer. If you are watching on YouTube, consider giving the video a like if you enjoy it. Consider subscribing if you watch through it and enjoy the content. And if you're listening on your different podcast services, rate, review, subscribe, all that good shit helps out the channel, helps it get it in front of more eyeballs or more fucking ear holes, whatever the fuck the terminology would be there for podcast listeners. But I appreciate any help getting this out to more people. So yeah, but how about we go ahead and crack the show off with what I am playing. All right, so I think what I want to talk about first, let's talk about Beyond Good and Evil 1. I played this a few years ago for the first time. Played through it for the first time a few years ago and loved it. And I've had an urge to go back to it. I've just been wanting to play it again. I love the world. I just thought it was so charming, such a good story, and so many little fun side activities to go and do in that world. I had a real urge to play through it again. And I gotta say, man, this is like equally heartbreaking and amazing when you look at how well this game holds up and how incredible these characters are and just how goddamn fun and different this title was. And when you're talking about this came out in a generation full of fun and different, unique, innovative new ideas in the game space, but Beyond Good and Evil still really stands out as something that's I think more special than most titles for its time. Like, I really do think that this is one of the best PlayStation 2, original Xbox 6th generation games. It's a fucking great time. But while it is all of those things, it's very heartbreaking that this thing is just dormant. That this thing is just languishing off in developmental hell at Ubisoft, especially when you look at the slate of Ubisoft, their releases as of late. They unique and bold and different and innovative. Those are terms you really don't hear thrown around often at all when discussing Ubisoft's latest games. They've made some good shit, a few good titles. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was great. Valhalla sold incredibly well. It didn't quite click with me. I found Far Cry 6 to be, more of the same, but fairly enjoyable. And you had like your Riders Republics, which is a little bit, it's unique, but this is so special, and that they are just sitting on this IP and doing nothing with it. It really boggles the brain, man, because what they introduce here with Beyond Good and Evil is essentially like Metal Gear Solid meets Tomb Raider meets Pixar, where you have this whimsical, cartoony-esque aesthetic, but it's accompanied by a deceptively deep and dark storyline with like government corruption and human trafficking going on at times, and like uncovering all these torturous sort of fucking trials and shit that I believe it's called the Alpha sections are performing on these people that they're capturing. And it's really fucking dark. And the more you explore it, and you're getting introduced to these different characters and the Iris organization, who are essentially trying to go up against the Alpha sections to expose them of their corruption. And it's really a great narrative. And Paige and Jade, the two kind of main characters of the game, have such a great chemistry, and this kind of father-daughter bond thing, and this mysterious backstory with Jade, and why she looks at Paige as a parental figure. Like, it's a great narrative. And then, like I said, it has the Metal Gear Solid-esque stealth sections where you're stealthing along and trying not to get spotted by the different soldiers or the different enemies. And you also have some kind of platforming-esque moments similar to something like Tomb Raider. And then with that cartoony aesthetic that would make you think it's just going to be this, throwaway story, but it's really, really not. And added on to all of that is this, I guess at the time you could call it an open world, or a somewhat open world that provides you exploration but then gets you back to the linear segments of the game for the main story. But you have these open worlds where you can go and you go on these, like, in the main city, they have a little bar where you can go in and play air hockey and play a little, like, almost carnival, guess where the ball is. This dude's moving the cups around with the ball inside of you, trying to keep your eye on the ball to figure out where it's at. And you have like little hovercraft races that you can go and participate in, and a little chase. These people are robbers, and you're going off and chasing them in these like little cave sections, and you're avoiding lasers and different environmental hazards as you're whipping your damn hovercraft. And it has like upgrades and shit where you can increase the you get like little boosts out in the world to where it's essentially like nitrous, and you can use that with your hovercraft. But you can also just upgrade the hovercraft in general throughout the game, and it's just such a fun fucking video game. I will say there's a couple things that, and it's weird, when I played it on the PS2, I don't remember having as many issues with the camera as I did playing through it, because I played through it on the Series X with the through the backwards compatibility with the 360 version, and I just found so many issues with the camera that I don't remember having on the PS2 version. I don't know if there was some issue with that port or that remaster, whatever you want to call it, but the camera was really, really wonky this time around. And so, yeah, there are some quality of life updates that would be nice, but I think just the core idea of Beyond Good and Evil is something that it's just a real heartbreaking story that this thing is just kind of sitting off and seems to probably never, very, very likely that this thing will probably never come out. And it's just a bummer, because they created such a unique world that even stands out apart from a lot of the other unique worlds that were created in that generation. And yeah, it's heartbreaking in that regard, but such a joy to go back to and play through. And especially when thinking about like what could be added on to this format, because like when I look at the combat, I think that's really one of the key elements of Beyond Good and Evil that could be improved upon with a sequel. It's pretty simple, just like one button kind of, just pressing square, pressing X, and then you can hold it down for like a charged attack. And it's fairly standard. You also get like a first person kind of shooting these little discs that are really useful, especially in stealth, because you're one of the main enemies in the game. They have like these oxygen tank like things, and when you throw the disc at them, you hit them in the back of the oxygen tank, and then they run around trying to restore that. They're trying to get their buddy to come over and restore their oxygen tank thing. And if you run up to them in time and kick them, it's kind of like a one-hit kill scenario if you can, either kick their oxygen tank or hit it with a disc. So those are really the only mechanics in the game for combat. And I think improving upon that, in which I will say a lot of the Ubisoft games, especially like Assassin's Creed, I think have fantastic combat with a good bit of variety that I think would work great for a Beyond Good and Evil style title. But what the biggest kind of, and I want to kind of walk around this without spoiling it, but the final act of this game, like the final hour or two, that opens up endless possibilities for where a sequel could go with Beyond Good and Evil, because it is, like I said, it's very Metal Gear Solid, it's very Tomb Raider, it's very Pixar-esque, Disney-esque with its aesthetic, but by the end of the game, I'll just say it gets very Star Wars-esque in its nature. And where they could take that, I mean, it is like an open slate, endless possibilities. And I kind of saw that with the little bit we saw of Beyond Good and Evil 2, the little bit of gameplay. It really looked like they were honing in on that one specific aspect. And I don't want to go too much more into it, because for those of you, I know it's a 2003 game, you're talking about 20 years ago. It should be in spoiler territory. We should be open to talk about it, but it's like, I discovered games last year that came out 20 years ago that I never played, and I wouldn't have wanted them spoiled for me. But the end of this game is the mechanic that it opens up is very fucking interesting, and I would love to see that explored more in a sequel. But yeah, all in all, man, I highly recommend, if you haven't played this game, check it out, give it a shot. It still holds up to this day, despite a few little quality of life issues. But outside of the combat being pretty simple, outside of the camera being a little bit wonky at times, it holds up incredibly fucking well, and the art style has aged like fine wine. It's kind of in that camp of art styles that never really shows its age. So yeah, I highly recommend checking this out. It is a very unique game. And so while I was on the Microsoft Store buying Beyond Good and Evil, I also saw, like, in the little suggestion box, other games you might like, or whatever the hell they call it. I saw this game called Henchmen Story, and I see the box art, and it's like the superhero characters on the box art. I'm like, I've never heard of this superhero game in my life. And so I clicked on it to get more information about it, and it was like, this superhero visual novel games. And it was like $15 on sale. I was like, okay, let's see what this is about. And I gotta say, this was quite the surprise, man. The setup of this game is essentially like you're working for this villainous organization, and you have been essentially like relegated to janitorial duties. Or just like very small jobs where you're guarding a door that gets very little foot traffic entering it or exiting it. You're whenever you do go on like your villainous jobs and go on heists and shit, you're robbing pet stores for cat food and then reselling it. It's like totally antithetical to everything you've ever heard about, superhero stories. And so I was like, okay, cool. The first couple hours of this game, I was like, and it's only a 3-hour game or so. And for $15, like, I don't mind that at all. And it totally voice acted. The entire thing. That's like the big thing that separates it from a lot of other visual novels, is the entire game fully voice acted, other than like the inner monologues that your character has. And the voice acting is very, very good, and it seems like very well directed, and like if there's moments of high stakes or high emotion or whatever the case may be, it's all portrayed really well, and it helps you get a lot more immersed into this world, and just the kind of like the lore and backdrop for this world that they've created is really immersive as well. Once again, it's silly, and it's like, it seems that society has become more accepting and acknowledges superheroes' existence a lot more openly in this game than a lot of the other superhero stories out there. But like, there's articles and entire publications where their magazine comes out each week. It's like top 10 superhero boss battles, top 10, most wealthy superheroes. And they have like this entire industry that is focused around observing and reporting on these, the goings on within the superhero world. And so it's just, they created something really, really interesting here. I will say, if you're tired of the quips and the MCU-esque dialogue, then this probably isn't going to be for you. The main character that you're playing as, Stan, is very sarcastic, kind of doing the fourth wall breaking shit at times, and very much in line with that MCU-esque style of humor with the sarcasm and shit. But for me, I don't really mind that style of humor. It can be grating at times, but it's never anything that like will put me off of a entire storyline. So yeah, I thought that they created something really cool here, and it's in that vein of your Telltale games, your choose your own adventure, where you're making decisions, and you have the branching plot lines. And what's cool here is you can save like the moment before you make a decision, and then go right back to that save, make a different decision, and see how far off it branches. which I didn't do much of that. I kind of just made the decisions that I wanted to make and stuck with those. But I would save the game and see like, oh shit, I could literally save it before making a crucial decision, go back around and just, instead of having to replay the whole game, replaying the main moment that takes place where you get to make the decision, and then, seeing all the different options that take place thereafter. Like, I think that's a really cool addition to this style of game that allows you to kind of see the big moments without replaying the entirety of the game to experience it. So and also I gotta say the options here, they do feel very much of importance. Like, you have your romantic options, but you even have, not to spoil anything, but you get to kind of choose the fate of your character, either, being good or being evil. And like, that's a pretty big decision to make for a game that is definitely working on a budget, an independent title working on a budget. And, with all the voice acting and all the backstory that they've built, all the lore that they've built, I was impressed with what I got out of this game. Like I said, it's very short, but I felt like it was a lot of substance, not a lot of filler with this title. Yeah, I would definitely recommend it for $15 if you're into visual novels. I think this is one of the more impressive visual novels that I've ever played. I really had a damn good time with it. I would love to see this be adapted into, like I said, a Telltale style game or something from Don't Nod, or like this is a cool world with cool characters and an intriguing intriguing lore built around all of it. I would love to see a little bit more, like some of these big moments with full on cutscenes and shit. I think that would be epic. Or even, getting to control some of these moments would be really, really damn fun. But I had a good time with the Henchmen Story, or I think it's just straight up Henchmen Story. But yeah, if you're into visual novels, I would recommend giving it a look. All right, and next up we got to talk about Planet of Lana. This is a day one Game Pass game that, it's a 2D kind of limbo inspired puzzle solver platformer. And when I saw the art style of it with the trailers, I was like, I got to check this thing out. And holy shit, it is one of the most breathtakingly beautiful games I have ever played in my life. This is stunning, man. The hand-drawn backdrops, some of these transitionary moments in the game where there's like at the beginning of the game, you're essentially walking around with this friend of yours, this girl who's a friend of yours, and you are like just going on a little journey. And as you're adventuring around, there's like this big fucking invasion of sorts, this almost alien invasion of sorts, and they end up abducting this girl. And as you're watching this entire town get decimated and this girl being abducted, it starts off as this beautiful, vibrant, just the greens and the yellows, these naturalistic colors, all become overwhelmed by this blue hue that very much represents the depressing tone of the game in this moment. And you're seeing these monolithic fucking robotic alien feeling creatures of sorts that are just towering over you, and the disparity between the size of your character versus the size of these characters in the backdrop, it feels so overwhelming. And this blue hue just complements it so well, and it's a striking visual representation at that moment to depict the feeling that you're having as the player. It is so goddamn impressive. And it just continues, man. Over the course of the game, you just see these different structures and these different, creations. And on an artistic level alone, it is very, very impressive. And along with the music it is perfect, man. It's absolutely perfect. If you like these style of games, these insides and limbos and these 2D, puzzle solver platformers, it is absolutely one I highly recommend. It's only like 4 hours long, and it's easy enough to get through. There may be a couple puzzles here here and there that stump you, and you pull up a guide, and every time you pull up a guide to you know, find the solution, you end up regretting it because you're like, damn, I could have figured that shit out. And that is the feeling I love having with these style of games. I love the feeling of, if I do end up pulling up a guide, feeling like I could have figured that out myself. I hate these obtuse ass, like, okay, do these 48 different things that you never learned how to do. Everything in this game, every solution is something that has kind of been laid out to you, something that you should know how to do. And then when you don't figure it out on your own, you kind of get mad at yourself. But the majority of the game, and I don't want to like oversell the difficulty, the majority of the game is fairly simple, fairly straightforward, and performing kind of routine tasks to get to the next platform, to get to the next level. And you get this little cat buddy, and it's the cutest shit ever, man. You get this little cat buddy, and there's one section in particular, I just love it so much. Your little cat buddy, they don't want to go in the water. You know, most cats don't like jumping in the water, and you have to cross this lake, and you're like, man, what the hell do I do? So you cross the lake yourself, and you're looking around. You're like, what can I use? And you find this little raft, this little wooden raft, and you bring it back over to your little cat buddy, and he hops on the raft, and you just like, you swim along, carrying him along on this lake until you get to the next side. And it's just a little moment, but it's so charming. And there's also just some really good puzzles in general. There's one where you're having to, once again, with the water, you're like raising and lowering the water pressure to you know, avoid being detected by these certain robotic enemies who are observing this lake, and kind of it's like this flying drone thing, and he's observing, or it's observing the lake and hovering above you. And whenever you can like lower the water pressure to get under and get cover under these certain surfaces, so that the drone will just kind of, you know, go right by you, not be able to see you. But then you got to raise the water if you want to like jump out and reach the next side or whatever. So there's just like cool setups to different puzzles like that you know, add a little bit of complexity to the game. And you know, having your cat, like, you get to send commands to your cat where there might be like a rope up top that you can't reach, but they can reach it. So you command them to jump up, they grab the rope for you, or, you know, hit the rope down for you, then you can climb up. And yeah, it's really fun. Like I said, it's not, to me, I don't think it's quite as hard as something like Limbo, but it's not as easy as something like Little Orpheus. It's a good balance between it pretty much at all times. It feels like you should be able to figure out the solution by yourself, but there will be a couple times that you get stumped, and it is that good feeling, to me, that satisfying feeling of when you pull up a guide, you kind of hit yourself upside the head like, damn, I know I could have figured that out on my own. The only real complaint I would have with the game is it feels like at times I can feel that it was probably tailor-made for PC over console, where like sometimes the commands with the cat where you're telling them to jump up onto a ledge, doing it with the analog stick could feel a little bit shaky, where the cursor's kind of shaking around and not being as responsive as you would hope. And with something like a mouse and keyboard, it just feels a little bit more point and click friendly at times. So that would be my only real complaint with it. As far as like the technical performance, it ran flawlessly. I never had a bug, I never had an issue, never had any kind of fucking technical issues whatsoever, other than the fact that at times it didn't feel as responsive as I imagine it probably is with a mouse and keyboard in terms of navigation. Alright, so those are the 3 games that I have been playing as of late, and I would honestly recommend all 3 of them. I think if you're into visual novels, Henchmen Story is really solid. I think everybody should play Beyond Good and Evil. I don't know anybody in the world that wouldn't enjoy that damn game. And then Planet of Lana, if you're into those Limbo-inspired titles, the 2D puzzle-solving platformers, like that's a great one there, especially if you're on Game Pass. So, solid week of video gaming there, but let's go ahead and head on into my top 10 games of 2001. So the plan here is to do this every week from started last week with 2000 all the way up until 2022, running through my top 10 for each year, and then obviously closing off with my list of my favorite games of 2023, and sometime later in the year hitting you with my top 100 games of all time. So this is the build up, this is the setup, and 2001 is a year full of some of my favorite games ever, man. This is a stacked year in video game history. A lot of people refer to 2001 as the greatest year ever in gaming, and we'll see. Maybe after I finish doing this, I'll do like a ranking list, ranking all the years of, gaming and game releases, but 2001 is fucking stacked, man. It's loaded. So let's go ahead and crack this top 10 open. Coming at number 10, we have Extermination. And this is, in my opinion, one of the more underrated survival horror games ever. It is like this blend of Metal Gear and Resident Evil, where it's not like the totally locked camera that you get with Resident Evil, and it's a little bit quicker than Resident Evil, but it's not quite as quick and action focused as Metal Gear Solid. And I think it really works for the overall feel that they're going for here. With your character being this special agent of sorts, and you're going off and investigating some kind of supernatural occurrence, and you're in this like underground bunker that has a very alien, very mysterious vibe to it. And it's just a really, really unique survival horror game that you can still find for fucking dirt cheap, because it's one that people really don't talk about. It hasn't been blown up with a hidden gem video by one of the big YouTubers or anything like this. This is still one that you can get fairly cheap, and I really, really do recommend it. They have some cool things going on here, like some more platforming elements that you really don't see often at all in survival horror games. Like you can run and roll and jump and climb. Like they got cool mechanics going on here. A really wonky story at times, but one I would definitely recommend if you are a big survival horror fan and you haven't checked it out. It's obviously aged a bit, but it's just a cool one to go back to, and I really do think it's one of the more underrated survival horror games of all time. And then staying right there on the survival horror theme with number 9, I have Silent Hill 2. And this is one of the darkest, one of the most fucked up stories ever in video games in general. And just the leap in technology from the PlayStation 1 with Silent Hill 1 to the PlayStation 2 with Silent Hill 2, I think it really immersed you more into this story, into this narrative, and obviously the introduction of these fucking brutally fucked up characters with Pyramid Head, who has now become maybe the most iconic character in Silent Hill, definitely the most identifiable character in Silent Hill, but really the story with Angela and the backstory there, that's kind of the selling moment in Silent Hill 2, or at least to me the most memorable moment, the most impactful moment of that entire game was that moment where Angela's pretty much breaking down her past with you. And as dark and fucked up and brutal as this game is, I think it's also incredibly depressing and sad. And then her introduction and her sharing her backstory with you, it really adds to that sense of despair in this world. And it's just a very impactful moment that I think could move even the most calloused of human beings, could move you to tears. So yeah, very impressive in that regard. And also, probably one of the more challenging Silent Hill games of all time. Not with like the boss fights or the difficulty with the enemy encounters, but the puzzle solving is just brutal, man. Brutally difficult. And it's as iconic as any survival horror game ever, which is why it's being remade right now, and I'm really excited to see what they do with that remake. I'm not holding my breath on it, but Yeah, definitely an iconic title with a ton of narrative weight behind it. One of the better narratives ever in the genre. Number 8, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. And the big feature that was introduced here that changed the game for Tony Hawk Pro Skater was the revert mechanic, which pretty much allowed you to string together these incredibly long combo sequences and rack up loads of points as you're going from your half pipe to your revert, and then leading that into a manual, and then combining that with a grind, and then building up that momentum that carries you back to the half pipe. And you're doing this all in one motion while keeping up that frenetic pace. And it was just a game-changing feature. But for me, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, out of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series, was the one that I have the most personal nostalgia with. We'll talk later, I think 2003, if I'm not mistaken, about another Tony Hawk game that I think is my overall favorite from the entire series. And a lot of the features here in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 would carry over to that game. We'll just talk about it when we get there. But there's no denying the impact that Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 had with that revert mechanic. It changed the game going forward for Tony Hawk Pro Skater. And I'm just such a huge fan of the franchise. And in that improvement alone earns it a spot on this list. And then heading on into number 7, staying with the extreme sports theme, we have SSX Tricky. EA Big making its first appearance here with, I do believe we have... Okay, no, that was... Okay, yeah. We have another EA Big game on this list. So, and I'm sure over the years you're going to hear a lot more about EA Big on these lists. But I enjoyed SSX, the first SSX game, and I enjoyed some of the other follow-up SSX games, but Tricky, man. SSX Tricky just totally clicked for me and worked for me and my brain at that time. It was a bit more over the top and arcadey, filling up your meter and pulling off the Uber tricks where you have the character doing these like totally unrealistic, silly, almost like dance moves while in air, and then having Run DMC blast and It's Tricky, and you're just absolutely fucking clicked for me. I loved the speed of the game. I loved going through and upgrading your character's stats and like slowly watching them evolve into this juggernaut of a snowboarder that could pull off damn near any move you could imagine on that slope. Just so fun. And I've tried pretty much all of the other games in the series after Tricky, and just none of them quite worked for me the same way that this one did. They all have their charm and fun elements, fun aspects, fun new twists, but It's Tricky, from the vibrant nature of it to the silly characters, like everything about it just worked for me. And yeah, definitely my favorite of the series. Number 6, Devil May Cry 1, the OG, the introduction. It's fucking crazy to think that, in an alternate world where we get RE4 out of Devil May Cry opposed to DMC, since it was initially being created as Resident Evil 4. It's just... I think that this was probably the best case scenario for Capcom. They ended up with 2 huge hits opposed to one very different, very weird, I imagine would have been a very weird entry in the Resident Evil franchise. And yeah, now you have 2 franchises still going strong to this day. And I don't think this is a popular opinion, but I think Devil May Cry 1 is still probably my favorite Devil May Cry game. I know 3 is fantastic, but I was just really hooked on 1 as a kid. And I'm sure, going back to it and playing through 3, I imagine 3 would probably be a much smoother experience than 1. But, being a Resident Evil junkie, it was sick seeing some of the similarities between the 2 games before Devil May Cry went like totally full throttle with the character action elements, which, don't get me wrong, the first game was absolutely a character action game. It literally invented the term, but I don't know, it was just a bit slower, at least in my memory. I remember being a bit slower than the games that followed it. And I dug that pace, being such a big fan of Resident Evil, and it still had, your high octane badass boss battles and the over the top action, but I really liked being able to slow down and take in the sights from time to time and kind of bask in that gothic horror that Devil May Cry 1 was offering up. I don't know, it felt slightly creepier and just a little bit more my speed than the other games. But I would love to go back and replay through that original trilogy, and obviously I still need to get to 4 and 5. But from my childhood memory, I still would have to say that Devil May Cry 1 would be my favorite. I'm very curious how they have aged, and playing them again for the first time in years as an adult, really curious to see if I would still feel the same way. But no doubt, as important of a game as almost anything else on this list, created an entire genre that followed it. So yeah, we probably don't get the likes of God of War. We probably don't get the likes of Bayonetta and other titles like that if it wasn't for Devil May Cry 1. So very, very influential, very, very important title, and one that I loved as a kid. In at number 5, I have Max Payne. And then, speaking of horror in non-traditional horror games, Max Payne 1 definitely, I would say, qualifies to be in that camp, especially with one section of that game that I still think is one of the scarier moments that I've ever experienced in games, or at least one of the spookiest moments I've ever experienced in games. The section where you follow the blood trail to the sound of your crying child, and then what ends up resulting there, it's easily one of the spookiest fucking moments ever in gaming for me. But obviously, with Max Payne 1, if we're going to talk about any game-changing and revolutionary moments or revolutionary features that came from that game, you got to talk about the bullet time mechanic. One of the most satisfying features, one of the most satisfying feelings ever in a game, where you're jumping in the air, slowing down time, gliding across a fucking bar top and blasting 3 or 4 dudes in the head with just pinpoint accuracy right before that slowdown runs out. It changed the game. It's still a feature that you see implemented into a ton of third-person shooters, and it was so goddamn fun to mess around with in this dark-ass, nihilistic-ass world in 2001. And we're getting it remade at some point. I know Remedy's hands are very, very full at the moment, with Alan Wake 2 releasing this year, Control probably releasing 2025, so you got to imagine, unless they have different teams working on different games, it'll probably be a little bit until we see Max Payne. But I am very much eager for its return. I loved those first 2 titles, and the third one made by Rockstar was incredible as well. And really glad that Rockstar allowed Remedy to go and remake the original Max Payne. So very pumped for that. Number 4, NBA Street. Once again, speaking of EA Big, I talked about this. I pretty much covered everything that I like about NBA Street in my top 10 PS2 games, so I'm going to keep this short. But the pace of NBA Street, it just worked for me. That blend between chaotic, breakneck speed from something like NBA Jam with a touch of simulation from your NBA Live games. It was just absolutely perfect. The balance was so perfect, and it just made for such a comprehensive arcadey basketball game that was close enough to what you could see on the blacktop, but silly enough to make it into an arcadey pick up and play experience that anybody could really jump into. I loved NBA Street, and it's my favorite of the series. I know 2 introduced a lot of features that were game changers, but NBA Street, the first one, still my favorite. Coming in at number 3, I got SmackDown Just Bring It. And this is undeniably one of the more controversial wrestling games of all time. It had many flaws, many issues, especially with the damn promotional material that was pretty much false advertising, showing you character models that in that trailer that look better than most character models in video games today, when the actual game was almost a copy and paste from SmackDown 2, even down to the graphics, which was massively disappointing when you consider the fact that this was, the first new gen WWF game. The season mode, hilariously short, incredibly simplistic, incredibly short. But I will say the one thing about the season mode is that it kind of changed the direction of season modes in wrestling games from that point on, with going with a more narrative focus where you could make decisions that slightly branch off, and you could like roam around backstage and kind of create these quick spontaneous moments that would just pop up, where you could get into a brawl in the fucking boiler room or whatever the case may be, which as a kid to me was so fucking cool. And I would be lying to you if I said I really gave a shit at the time as a kid. As an adult, I would have been pissed about, all the false advertising and all the hoopla about the game looking just like a PS1 game, even though it was on next gen hardware. Like, that would have pissed me off as an adult for sure. But as a kid, I didn't understand any of that stuff. I was just like, holy shit, we got a new SmackDown game on the PS2, and I'm playing the hell out of this thing. I'm playing through every season, or playing through every character in this season mode, and just having an absolute blast with the little 2-hour season mode, and swapping between different characters and getting not all that different of a season mode. But I don't know, it was cool. Like, you could pursue different belts and create your own little storylines that way. So I don't know, I'm not sitting here saying it was a revolution in storytelling or a revolution in really any respect. It was very much a copy and paste of SmackDown 2, but I do think that season mode laid the groundwork that was built on with Shut Your Mouth and Here Comes the Pain, and then into the SmackDown versus Raw games. Like, I just personally never, I appreciate the simulation universe mode style season modes, but I just love having the narrative infused in there with the decision making. And for me at the time, like, getting to make decisions in a wrestling game was just huge. I thought that was so cool. So look, here's the thing. If we're going to be honest, any of my top 10 lists, anytime, probably until 2008, when we run through these, if there's a wrestling game or a WWE game or a WWF game that released in those years, if I'm being honest, it's probably going to be on the list. It was just what I played the most of. That and another game that we're going to talk about right here. Grand Theft Auto 3 coming in at number 2. Nothing I played more as a kid than GTA games and wrestling games. And so anytime there's a Grand Theft Auto game or a wrestling game from this time to about 2008 or so, it's going to be on the list. So number 2, Grand Theft Auto 3. And this is maybe the most important game of my lifetime. Not my favorite Grand Theft Auto game. Not really even close. It was just, it laid the groundwork. You know what I mean? It laid the groundwork for what the other games would build off of and iterate and improve from this template that was set with GTA 3. But the boundlessness, the unshackled nature of Grand Theft Auto 3 was something that I never even experienced anything close to that in gaming before GTA 3. And just the speed at which I could get to whatever destination on this map I wanted to get to. And of course, they had like some barriers, some places that you couldn't enter and shit like that. It was early in the process of open world game development. But I just remember like going around and trying to grab the different Banshees in the game. I believe that was the name of the like Corvette looking car, and just driving those motherfuckers at breakneck speed and taking crazy twists and turns, doing insane jumps that I'd never seen done before in games, and building up my wanted levels. And it was just this insane sandbox that I had never experienced anything like that in my life up to that point. And like I said, the next 2 games that followed it, I enjoyed much more than GTA 3, but this is, I don't want to say the most important game ever, but in my lifetime, I would say the most important game ever in my lifetime. So yeah, it was a game changer, and it kind of identified in me what I love the most in games, which, we'll talk about in a second with why I still love open world games. But GTA 3 was an absolute game changer. In at number one, and man, I'm still debating this. Number 1 and 2 are a toss up for me. I right now I'm going Metal Gear Solid 2 over GTA 3 for number 1. And I think the kid version of me would be quite upset at that choice. I think the kid version of me would definitely go GTA 3 over Metal Gear Solid 2. But, we have hindsight now, and looking back in retrospect, if I was going to go back and play a Grand Theft Auto game from that era, from the PS2 era, from the trilogy, I would play Vice City and San Andreas over 3. If I was going to go back and play any Metal Gear Solid game just in isolation, it would be Metal Gear Solid 2. And so it's tough, because I want to look at these lists as they were at the time and also try to fuse in how I feel about them now. And that's where these two really butt up against one another. And in a different day, in a different mood, I might go GTA 3 over MGS2, but I'm going to go MGS2 at number 1 for now. I think it's one of, if not the best stories ever in games. The prophetic nature of that story and seeing it play out in like modern day society and the political climate is fucking wild. And just the improvements visually from Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PS1 to 2 on the PS2, and not having some of the more tedious elements, or in my opinion, the tedious kind of simulation elements of MGS3. It was just such a smooth experience that was very similar to Metal Gear Solid 1, but with the improved graphical fidelity and the improvements to the quality of life improvements to the combat mechanics and shit. And then just an awesome setting with the tankers, some cool ass boss fights. Like, it is kind of the perfect Metal Gear Solid game for what I want in a Metal Gear Solid game. So I'm going to go with it at number 1. Like I said, on a different day, a different mood, I might swap GTA 3 for that number 1 spot, just because it kind of defined what I love about video games, and that still carries through to this day, which I guess is a decent segue there to jump into the final topic of the show. Let me go ahead and check one more time to make sure that the vote hasn't changed yet, and we don't have to do a switcheroo on the fly here. But let's see and make sure that Why I Still Love Open World Games is leading the poll. All right, so yep, still at 35% Why I Still Love Open World Games to 30% for 5 Things I Hate About Modern Games. So our final topic remains Why I Still Love Open World Games. And this is one that Sean Ward, a friend of the channel, he hit me up in the comments and was discussing, some of his displeasures with modern gaming and how he's finding it hard for certain things to really click with him, with a lot of the bloat and the 100+ hours of mindless engagement, mindless content in a lot of games, not just open world games, but open world games can very much be guilty of this. And we'll get into that. I want to discuss some of the pitfalls and some of the things I don't like about open world games as well. But to kick it off, carrying off the back of that GTA 3 discussion, I think that when I saw the freedom and just how unshackled you could be in these sandboxes, it created like a different, not expectation, because I don't want all games to be open world games, but it created like a different sense of what I understood to be possible in video games. And I think that a lot of the innovation that we see in gaming, whether it be, Elden Ring, or whether it be Tears of the Kingdom, with the innovation in puzzle solving and the innovation in exploration, and kind of just, once again, that sort of changed the game for how we could navigate in open worlds, and seeing what the influence of that game will be 5, 10 years, 15 years down the line is going to be going to be incredible. Like, I imagine when I look at something like Jedi Survivor and the follow up to that, and imagine like doing some Breath of the Wild style puzzle solving mechanics, but with like force powers and shit. And like, there's just so many open world games. It feels limitless. It feels like there's no ceiling on what could possibly take place. Now, the issues become whenever an open world game, to me, isn't just a game that's vast and empty and full of random combat encounters that add up to nothing substantial and just get you from point A to point B. If that's what you're doing in an open world, is getting from point A to point B, I think that you kind of have to ask yourself, was it necessary for this game to be an open world game? And I think you look at a lot of titles and go, yeah, why was this an open world game? Dragon Age Inquisition. I really do enjoy that game, but nothing about Dragon Age Inquisition really needed to be open world. I like the more kind of open, you had some open exploration going on in Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age 1, but it wasn't open world. It still led you down like a linear pathway and got you to the big beats of the narrative, which I loved. And I thought the open world of Dragon Age Inquisition kind of hurt the overall immersion of the story. So when I look at open world games and for what I really want from it, it should be mandatory that you have an open world game, because it aids some mechanic or some design choice that you like. Once again, Tears of the Kingdom, that kind of has to be open world if you want to make that style of game. If you want to make a traditional Zelda game, doesn't really have to be open world. When I look at Grand Theft Auto, you're flying helicopters, you're driving these cars, you're pulling off these heists that incorporate the open world in the mission structure like that has to be open world for that to work. And Red Dead Redemption, the feeling of isolation when you're out in the world and going hunting, and it adds to the immersion with the narrative. And so there's a lot of examples. I think there's a lot of examples of games that, like Metal Gear Solid 5, I know some people really, really love that game. I don't think it necessarily needed to be an open world. But I think there's a lot of examples of games that, for me, laid the groundwork of how to do open worlds in a more interesting manner. And I don't want to, I'm not going to do the whole thing where I just pick on Ubisoft and their open world design, because truth being told, I think that some of the Ubisoft open world games are fucking excellent. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is fucking excellent. Far Cry 3 is excellent. Far Cry 5 and 6 are solid. Far Cry 4 is solid. I don't hate Ubisoft's approach to open world, because I think a lot of the Ubisoft games actually make sense as open world games. And I still to this day like having objective markers on my map where I can follow straight to the point of interest where I want to go and find what I want to find, and have a great example of an open world style that I like is Batman Arkham City. I have some issues with Batman Arkham City, but I love how, you have your points of interest that you're traveling to, but then a lot of the main bulk of the game takes place in a more linear fashion when you enter these buildings, and a lot of the interior design is built around the kind of Metroidvania elements that you got from Batman Arkham Asylum. And I love that juxtaposition where I have this freedom out in the open world where I can go and, go anywhere, however I want to get there, run around, see any spontaneous encounters that pop up. If that's what I'm feeling at the time, I can go and engage with that. The Evil Within 2 is another great example of giving me a straightforward linear narrative and then a bunch of cool side content on the side that I can get more backstory on Sebastian from these little occurrences that'll pop up in the world. I can go and hoard more resources, which that ties in so well to the survival horror elements of the Evil Within 2 where, the world is progressively getting more dangerous as you go through the course of the game, and then you have to deal with that balance in your mind of, do I want to go out and risk my resources that I currently have by trying to obtain more resources before I go back into my next run of, the more linear style segments of the story where I might not obtain as many resources, but there's a bunch of these new monsters popping up in the open world that are presenting new threats to me. And there's just a lot of great examples of games who are using open worlds in really, really interesting ways. The Outer Worlds is a prime example once again of building smaller but multiple small scale open worlds that are full of interactivity, full of detail, and full of characters that are adding something to your exploration, giving you some new context, giving you, some at times essential key characters to this journey to interact with, who you're going to be interacting with for the long haul. And I think that there's just this natural inclination or this natural thought that if you're making an open world game, you have to make these 100+ hour adventures for the player to go on that's full of a lot of fetch quests, that's full of a lot of shit that doesn't necessarily add to the substance and the meat of the game, but more adds to the hour counter that it seems a lot of publishers or developers have this hour counter in mind, that if their game's not, 60, 70 hours, can they really charge $60, $70 for it? And I don't know. I don't really agree with that ideology. Like Mass Effect 1 is a great example of me, and it's we're talking about an RPG here, not an open world game, but a lot of RPGs are in that same vein of 100+ hours to really maximize your value out of the game. And Mass Effect 1, you can get through it in 15 hours, breeze through it, and it's still one of the most impactful RPGs that I've ever played in my life. It didn't need to be 100 hours because the impact that it had on me in the 15 hours or 20 hours or whatever was more impactful than anything I could get out of the majority of 100+ hour RPGs. And I guess that's the thing that I'm trying to say here, tying back to open world games, is that I don't really think that the hour counter should matter quite as much. And I hope that we're gonna start to see that phase lessen, where I would much rather have an impactful 20 hours, 30 hours than insignificant, 75, 100 hours. Because when I look at Arkham City, when I look at the Outer Worlds, when I look at, the Evil Within 2 and even Insomniac Spider-Man and fucking lots of titles, some of the best open world games of all time, they don't overstay their welcome at all. And like I said, I do think that open worlds breed a ton of innovation for this industry and the endless possibilities, because you can get something like Mercenaries, where it's this totally, or Just Cause, this total sandbox of carnage and chaos and destruction. Or you can get something like, Tears of the Kingdom, which is essentially a sandbox full of puzzle solving and mystery and innovation in that respect. Or then you can get something like Red Dead Redemption, where the open world aids the narrative so well. And there's just so many combinations of what you can get from an open world. And this isn't, once again, to shit on Ubisoft or that design philosophy, because I don't hate it. I do hate some of the fetch questy nature that they put in their games that seems like it's placed there just to pad the hour counter. I hate that, and I do want that to be removed. My whole thing is why am I doing this? When I'm playing a game, I often have that question, like, why am I doing this? And if I can't come up with a good answer for why I'm doing that, then it's not going to be something that I end up sticking with and finishing. And that is something that I do think needs to improve with open world games. But it's undeniable to me that there's no style of game that I can get more immersed into. There's no style of game that I think has that limitless, the no ceilings attached to it. There's no genre of game that I feel really fits into that box like open world games, and since Grand Theft Auto 3, like we'll go over it, over the years, but I think that probably in the last 20 years, 12, 13 of my last 20 game of the years were probably open world games. It's just something that totally works for my brain. And I think there's so much that could still be done in this genre. And I think you're seeing it every year. The games that are like the game changers, the games of the generation, in 2023 we have Breath of the Wild. 2022 we had Elden Ring. In 2018 we had Red Dead Redemption 2, and you have games in between that are the Yakuzas and the Judgments, and there's just so much that great shit still coming out of open world titles. And I there's a lot that can be improved upon. There's a lot of ideas and design philosophy that I don't love, but it's still my favorite genre. It's still the genre that in my opinion has the greatest list of games ever. Like if you stacked the open world genre up to the action adventure or the fucking whatever the case, I still think the open world genre has the list of the greatest games ever inside of it. I don't know if that ramble was satisfying, a satisfying answer to why I still love open world games. I wish I had a little bit more time to prepare and get my thoughts organized on that, but that's sort of my ramble of why I still love open world games, and also some things I think should be improved and can be improved within the genre. But once again, I think if you stack up the list of games, the greatest games of all time, you put the open world games up against this genre or that genre, I think open world games have for sure the greatest list of titles of any genre if you were comparing one versus another. And I still think we're seeing it every year. The most innovative, groundbreaking titles are coming, from open world games. And so that's my thoughts on why I still love open world titles, and I still think there's a great future for them ahead. But I do hope a lot of that bloat gets cut out. So hope that's somewhat of a satisfying response there. But that, my friends, is the episode today, episode 13 of Unnecessary Rambling. I appreciate y'all for stopping by. Like I said, the 8th or early on the 9th, my Summer Games Fest Showcase review recap. Then on the 11th, the Xbox Showcase review recap. So a lot of good shit coming ahead. And stay locked in, stay tuned. And I appreciate y'all for sticking around. Appreciate y'all for watching. And like, share, subscribe, do all those good things if you feel so inclined to do so. And until next time, guys, take it easy, and I will see you all soon. Goodbye.